Throughout history, accusations of witchcraft have led to some of the most horrifying executions ever recorded. These weren't quick deaths. They were prolonged spectacles of torture designed to extract confessions and serve as warnings to entire communities. The methods used were so brutal that witnesses would recount them for generations, their details preserved in court records and historical accounts that still shock us today. If these stories of crushed bones, screaming pyres, and centuries of blind hatred didn't make you look away, then you belong here. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on the bell, because every week I'm dragging another forgotten atrocity out of the shadows. And trust me, you won't unsee what's coming next. Welcome to the dark side of history. See you in the next one. What you're about to hear isn't fiction. These are real events that happened to real people, mostly women, who were accused of practicing the dark arts. The evidence against them was often nothing more than hearsay, superstition, or the desperate accusations of tortured prisoners. Yet the punishments they faced were among the cruelest ever devised by human imagination. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the witch trials represent one of humanity's darkest chapters. You'll learn about execution methods so savage that they make medieval warfare look merciful. And you'll discover how fear and hysteria can transform ordinary people into merciless executioners. But first, let me give you some context about what made these deaths so uniquely terrible. Unlike common criminals who face standard executions, accused witches were believed to have made pacts with the devil himself. This supernatural element meant their punishments had to be equally extraordinary. The goal wasn't just death, but the complete destruction of both body and soul. The burning pyre of Agnes Sampson. In 1591, Scotland was gripped by witch hysteria following a series of storms that threatened King James VI's return voyage from Denmark. Among those accused was Agnes Sampson, a respected midwife and healer from East Lothian. Her crime was allegedly raising these supernatural tempests through demonic magic. Sampson's ordeal began long before her execution. She was subjected to what authorities called examination, but which amounted to systematic torture. Iron devices called witches' bridles were clamped around her head, their metal spikes piercing her tongue and cheeks to prevent her from casting spells. Sleep deprivation followed, with guards keeping her awake for days until exhaustion broke her resistance. The torture escalated when she continued to maintain her innocence. Her accusers stripped her naked and shaved every hair from her body, searching for the devil's mark that would prove her guilt. When they found a small birthmark on her shoulder, they declared it evidence of her supernatural pact. Under extreme duress, Sampson eventually confessed to meeting with the devil in North Berwick churchyard. She claimed to have participated in a coven of over 200 witches who had plotted against the king. These forced confessions sealed her fate and implicated dozens of others in what became known as the North Berwick witch trials. On the day of her execution, crowds gathered at Edinburgh's Grassmarket to witness the spectacle. Sampson was tied to a tall wooden stake surrounded by bundles of dry wood and straw. Unlike typical burnings where victims were sometimes granted the mercy of strangulation before the flames reached them, witch burnings were designed for maximum suffering. The fire was lit at her feet, flames slowly climbing upward. The initial heat would have caused unbearable pain as it blistered and charred her lower limbs. Witnesses reported that she remained conscious, screaming prayers and protestations of innocence as the flames consumed her legs. The smoke would have filled her lungs, making each breath a struggle. As the fire intensified, her clothing ignited, adding to the inferno. The heat would have caused her skin to crack and split, blood boiling beneath the surface. Her hair, despite being shaved during her torture, would have singed away instantly once the flames reached her head. Medieval accounts describe the sound of her voice changing as the fire damaged her throat and vocal cords. Her final words became unintelligible gasps before the smoke and flames finally silenced her forever. The entire ordeal lasted nearly 20 minutes, with spectators close enough to hear every detail of her agony. But Agnes Sampson's death was just the beginning of Scotland's witch-hunting frenzy. Her forced confession had named accomplices, and King James VI personally interrogated many of the accused. The paranoia she had unwillingly helped create would claim dozens more lives in equally horrific ways. The drowning trials of Germany. During the height of European witch hysteria in the late 16th century, the Germanic regions developed a particularly cruel method of determining guilt. Water ordeals had been used for centuries, but the witch trials elevated them to new levels of systematic brutality. The process began with the accused being stripped and searched for supernatural marks. Their thumbs were tied to their opposite big toes, forcing them into an impossible position that made swimming nearly impossible. This binding technique, known as the witch knot, was specifically designed to ensure the accused would sink if they were innocent. The irony was deliberately cruel. If the accused floated, it proved the water had rejected them because of their unholy nature, confirming their guilt. If they sank and drowned, they died innocent, but still died nonetheless. The outcome was predetermined death, with only the method varying. The condemned women were dragged to rivers, ponds, or specially constructed pools, while crowds gathered to witness the spectacle. Local clergy would often preside over the proceedings, lending religious authority to what was essentially legalized murder. The accused would be forced to confess their sins one final time before being subjected to the water ordeal. In the town of Würzburg, court records from 1629 detail the drowning of Maria Holl, a baker's wife accused of spoiling bread through witchcraft. She was bound with coarse rope that cut into her flesh as she struggled. The executioners used long wooden poles to push her beneath the surface repeatedly, allowing her to gasp for air just long enough to prolong her suffering. Each time Maria surfaced, gasping and choking, the crowd would shout accusations at her. Water filled her lungs as she tried desperately to speak, to proclaim her innocence one last time. Her movements became weaker with each submersion, as hypothermia set in from the frigid water. The final time they held her under, bubbles stopped rising to the surface after nearly 3 minutes of thrashing. But even death didn't end the torment. Maria's body was declared guilty by virtue of sinking, and local authorities ordered it to be burned anyway. Her corpse was dragged from the water and thrown onto a pyre, the flames hissing against her waterlogged clothing. The townspeople watched as the fire slowly dried and consumed her remains, believing they were witnessing divine justice. The crushing wheel of Catherine Monvoisin. In 1680, France was consumed by the affair of the poisons, a scandal that implicated members of the royal court in witchcraft and murder. At the center of this web of accusations stood Catherine Monvoisin, known as La Voisin, a fortune-teller who allegedly provided poisons and love potions to aristocratic clients. La Voisin's execution was ordered by King Louis XIV himself, who wanted to make an example that would terrify anyone considering similar practices. The method chosen was breaking on the wheel, a punishment typically reserved for the worst criminals. For an accused witch, it carried additional symbolic meaning, as the wheel represented the eternal cycle of divine justice. The execution took place at the Place de Grève in Paris before thousands of spectators. La Voisin was stripped to her undergarments and bound spread-eagle to a large wooden wheel mounted horizontally on a post. Her arms and legs were stretched across the spokes, leaving her joints vulnerable to the executioner's hammer. The breaking began with her fingers and toes, small bones crushed methodically to maximize pain while keeping her conscious. Each blow of the iron hammer shattered bone and tore flesh, but avoided vital organs that would cause quick death. La Voisin's screams echoed across the plaza as spectators pressed closer to witness every detail. The executioner worked his way up her limbs, breaking the bones in her hands and feet before moving to her forearms and shins. The crowd counted each blow, some keeping tally marks to remember the spectacle. By the 15th strike, her left arm hung at an unnatural angle, completely shattered from wrist to shoulder. Lavoisin remained conscious through the systematic destruction of her body. Court observers noted that she continued to deny the charges against her, even as her bones were pulverized. Her voice grew weaker with each broken rib, but she managed to gasp out prayers between the hammer blows. The final phase involved breaking her spine and skull. The executioner positioned his hammer carefully, delivering crushing blows that paralyzed her lower body while keeping her aware of everything happening. Only after her ribs were completely destroyed, puncturing her lungs and making breathing impossible, did death finally claim her. These accounts represent just a fraction of the countless individuals who died during centuries of witch persecution. From Agnes Sampson's agonizing flames to Lavoisin's shattered bones, each death tells the same horrifying story of humanity's capacity for cruelty when driven by fear and superstition. The methods varied, but the suffering was always deliberate, always prolonged, and always witnessed by crowds who believed they were serving justice. The witch trials ended not because society became more enlightened, but because the hysteria simply burned itself out, leaving behind only scattered records of unimaginable brutality. These weren't just executions. They were calculated attempts to destroy the human spirit itself, turning death into a public spectacle of terror that would haunt communities for generations.